Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning. You're very welcome to this, the latest episode in the Signpost webinar series. My name is Cian Condon. I'm an outreach and innovation specialist with Teagasc and also the coordinator of this webinar series. This morning, after the disappointment of last night, at least it's bright and sunny morning where I am, and we're also lucky enough to be joined by Carla Bockermann. And Carla is with the Weihenstephan-Triesdorf University, I hope I pronounced that okay, in Germany. And Carla's going to speak to us about their experience in rewetting peatlands. So you're very welcome this morning, Carla. I'm also joined by Patrick Tuohy and Professor Owen Fenton. So Owen is a principal research officer, and Pat is a senior research officer in the area of peats and peat grasslands here in Johnston Castle in Ireland. Not only will they be assisting with questions, but also they'll bring some context from an Irish situation into the research of Carla and our team in Germany. Carla, thank you very much.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So a quick introduction. I'm a researcher at the Peatland Science Center at the Weihenstephan-Triesdorf University of Applied Sciences, which is based in Freising, south of Germany, close to Munich. And I've been focusing on environmental research and on climate research, mainly in peatlands. And also my focus is on fen peatlands. And you will see why during my introduction. And I'm very happy to share now a few of our most recent findings of our studies that we conducted over the past 8 years now. And as I already said, so I'm talking about rewetting peatlands in southern Germany, but the focus will be on fen paludiculture for greenhouse gas mitigation. Quick outline. So I will start with the current state of organic soils in Germany to give you an overview of what's happening here. Then I will get into the greenhouse gas mitigation options and introduce fen paludiculture. And I will highlight the more used paludiculture project, which my main part of research was focused on the greenhouse gas fluxes of paludicultures, but I will also go into further research that we've done on other mitigation options, such as extensification of management, rewetting in general, and of course paludiculture. And we recently finished a larger study on fertilization of paludiculture. And in the end, I will also quickly talk about the adaptation to climate change, particularly warming in organic soils. So let's first have a look at the current situation in Germany. And the Thunen Institute for Climate Smart Agriculture recently updated the German map of organic soils. And you can see in this map that most of our organic soils are distributed in the north of Germany and some in the south. In the center, there aren't really many. This is due to the origin of organic soils. So mostly they formed during the retreat of the glaciers after the last ice age, 12,000 years ago. And where the glaciers retreated in the north and close to the Alps, this is where most of the peatlands then formed. So today, peatlands or organic soils cover about 1.93 million hectares of Germany, which is about 5.1% of the total land area, and which is also 7% of the agricultural land. So not really that much, but you will see in a second why the focus on these lands is so high. And on the pie chart on the right, you see the fraction by land use category. So mostly we use our peatlands or organic soils as grassland. Over half of them are used as grassland. Then about 20% as croplands and 16% again as forest land. And most of the organic soils in Germany are drained. We almost succeeded in draining all of them. So between 90 and 89% are currently still drained, even though there are some successful large restoration projects happening. And if you look at the bottom graph here, you see the frequency distribution of the mean annual water tables in the major land use categories. And we do have some that are really deeply drained, up to 1.6 meters of water tables. These are annual values. But as you see, there are also most of them are drained between 0 and 1 meter. Yeah, so much for the current use. And the consequence of this is the resulting greenhouse gas emissions from these organic soils due to the use that we've been practicing over the past 100, 200 years. And there was the main result of a major study, national study in Germany, performed by Thiemeyer and colleagues, was that they created, or that they formulated emission factors for these different land use categories. So you see here the land use categories, the main land use categories of organic soils today, the different components of greenhouse gas emissions, and the last column is important as this shows the total greenhouse gas emissions of this land use category. So in Germany, drained organic soils emit around more than 50 million tons of greenhouse gases per year, which is equivalent to 7% of the total national greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a huge part considering that they only cover 5% of the land area. And 80% of these emissions come from the land use class cropland and grassland, which also have among the highest emission factors for the land use categories. If you look at the top graph, this is just important to show that carbon dioxide in green here actually makes up the biggest portion of these emissions. And this national study also found, as several others, that there was a significant correlation between the carbon dioxide emissions, which make up the biggest part of the emissions in total, and the water table. So in the graph, you see the water table is basically increasing towards the right, and the emissions are increasing upwards, CO2 emissions. And we definitely see that there's a relationship there. And so increasing the water levels means decreasing the CO2 emissions. And an optimum was formulated of around minus 10 centimeters, which is to be aimed for in rewetting measures. And knowing this is very important if we look at the international and national climate targets that have been set, not just in Germany, but in many countries. And logically, targeting a reduction of CO2 emissions on organic soils makes sense, especially also if we want to achieve the LULUCF, so the land use change and forestry sector target of increasing sink function to minus 25 tons of CO2 equivalents by 2030. And just note that currently these emissions are actually positive. So there's a long way to go, and in Germany, we are not on track of meeting this target. And so to reduce these emissions, which is definitely needed if we look again at the emission factor of just 40 tons per CO2 equivalents per 1 hectare of cropland per year. And there are some measures, for example, restoration is a very powerful tool to reduce the emissions. So we would, from the national data set, we know we would go from the 40 tons to just 5 tons. However, this also means that we stop production of this land. So this is not a very well-perceived measure, at least not in Germany. So even though this measure has been around for decades, land owners, of course, and practitioners are not very keen on performing restoration on their land. And the figure here also shows you from the national data set that there's also a correlation between methane emissions and water table. So it's like the inverse of CO2. So if you have increased water levels, you will have increased methane emissions. So if in restoration projects, the water management is not that successful, or you aim too high, then you will have the issue from a climate perspective that you're really increasing the methane emissions. But there are other measures as well. So there are some established greenhouse gas mitigation options, for example, management extensification, so reducing the intensity of management on these lands, or grassland rewetting. These are two more established mitigation options. But, and this is the main topic here, paludiculture is a new, or let's say a rediscovered mitigation measure, which also allows the continuation of agricultural use, but has the benefit of creating semi-natural systems. So the good thing here would...
Sorry, Carla, can I just come in there? Can
Yeah.
you just give a brief outline of what paludiculture is, just
Yes.
to make sure
In
that...
a second, sorry. So just for comparison, so we have these mitigation options, and paludiculture, I will explain this in a second, sorry, is an option that has been suggested. However, no one knows what the emissions of these options might be, and they've only been estimated. So now let's get to the concept of paludiculture. which basically is the transformation of currently used agricultural, like croplands on organic soils or grasslands on organic soils that we know have very high greenhouse gas emissions. But the idea is to transform these systems into rewetted peatlands where we grow vegetation that is common for peatlands. So in our case, in the Fen peatlands, these are common vegetations that you would find in natural wetlands or that we still find in the ditches now between the agricultural fields. Yeah, so I will give you an example of the plants in a second. So the idea is that because we increase the water level, we minimize the peat oxidation. And still, this will still allow for agriculture or even forestry on wet soils. Well, so far so good. That was the theory of paludiculture, but until a few years ago, or until we've done this, no one had actually empirically proven the effect, the climatic benefit of this transformation pathway, even though it's been pushed really hard politically and also socially. And the political motivation behind this really lies in several new resolutions. For example, the mentioning of peatland protection, restoration, and rewetting as a priority in conventions like Biodiversity Convention or the UNFCCC. This is also mentioned in the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, and this offers comprehensive guidance on the restoration of wetland ecosystems. And then the new EU Nature Restoration Law, which came out in 2024, which aims at restoring degraded ecosystems across Europe, actually explicitly lists paludiculture as a mitigation measure. And in general, you're probably aware of this, it's mandatory to submit national greenhouse gas inventory reports, particularly on key categories, and organic soils are definitely a key category in Germany, and I'm very sure in Ireland as well. And these inventory reports monitor, first of all, the extent of organic soils, as well as the greenhouse gas emissions and removals in the LULUCF sector reporting. And as of this year, the EU LULUCF regulation expands to all managed lands. So managed wetlands are also included now. But of course, as policy and farmers need numbers, yeah, we initiated the More Use project to empirically quantify the greenhouse gas emissions of newly established Fen paludicultures and to assess finally the greenhouse gas mitigation potential. We also wanted to determine the optimal water level for maximizing this greenhouse gas mitigation potential. This was not known as well. And we wanted to verify the minimum required water levels as defined by the present paludiculture definition, because there were just suggestions, but none of it was proven. And the main goal was then to propose emission factors for paludiculture as a new land use category for the integration in emission reporting frameworks. And in another part of the project, we also identified viable biomass utilization options, but this will not be a main focus of this presentation. So in order to do the study, we established paludicultures in 3 larger Fen peatlands regions in Bavaria. So now you're looking at just a part of Germany, just the southern eastern part, Bavaria. And the green parts here are the peatlands. And we selected 3 locations in Germany. One is Riedhausen, Langenmosen, and Freisinger Moos, which are very representative of the current use. And these peatlands were formerly drained for cropland or grassland, which is the main typical use in Germany. And we rewetted these sites by active pumping and or by blocking the drainage ditches. And we established the paludicultures in these sites between 2016 and 2019. Just let's quickly look into the soil. So these are the 3 different sites again. And what I wanted to mention or highlight here is that you see the first meter of the soil of each site. And they were quite different, which is good because we also wanted to present the variety of soils that are here. And these separate histosols are actually, or mainly are very degraded fen soils that at the top 30 centimeters have earthified structure. So you really don't see the structure of the plant material that formed these soils. But below that, and I'm not sure if you can see it in these pictures, we actually see structures of plant material, so the origin of what initially formed these organic soils. So these two field sites had a thick layer of up to 2, 3, or 4 meters of peat still underneath this 30 centimeters of degraded soil. And the third location, we didn't know this when we selected it really, only had about 30 to 60 centimeters of peat left. Yeah, so only in the top part, and then this mineral clay layer is starting. This will be important in a second for the water retention or the success of rewetting. So the plants that we established, and now we're coming to typical fen paludiculture plants, include the lesser pond sedge, Carex acutiformis. So this is one of these little images here. And we established in total 11 different treatments of this lesser pond sedge over a water table gradient between -30 to -2 centimeters. And we performed the management one winter harvest. Then we have the reed canary grass, Phalaris aroninacea. Here we established 9 treatments within a water table range of -22 to +1 centimeter. And in this particular plant species, we actually tested 3 different management strategies. We had the typical one winter harvest, then we added a summer harvest, and we also tested in a few treatments fertilization. Then we also had 7 treatments of common reed, Phragmites australis, over a range of -23 to +1 centimeter in one winter harvest, and 8 different cattail treatments between -22 and +4 centimeters, also with one winter harvest. And at this point, I would like to highlight that in the project, we also developed a guideline for establishment of fen paludicultures in English, which is freely available for download. So feel free to look at that. And coming to the methods, I would just really quickly go through this, how we quantified the greenhouse gas emissions, because it's a complex process, but I'll just break it down quickly. So we did the greenhouse gas measurements over the period 2016 to 2022. So this is between 1 and 5 years after the establishment of plants. And we used, in the pictures, you can see the method that we use. This is the closed chamber method. So this can be done manually, which is mostly the case, or by an automated system, which we actually invented or developed within this project. So this is actually unique in the world, but very handy to really quantify emissions on a high temporal resolution. So we measured the greenhouse gases carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and we also quantified the biomass yield to calculate the carbon export of the site. And in the case of Phalaris, we also quantified the carbon import from organic fertilization. So altogether, when we come to the greenhouse gas balances, we combine all these components. And to make it equal or comparable, the unit is the carbon dioxide equivalence, which is calculated by multiplying the gases methane, nitrous oxide by their global warming potentials, in this case, according to the IPCC 5th assessment report, meaning that methane is multiplied by global warming potential of 28, and nitrous oxide even by 26. And just quickly to mention, we are not considering fluvial carbon losses in this equation, simply because they are such a small component compared to the other balanced components here. So this is a lot of effort and not necessary in these systems. And I want to highlight this one field site. We have an additional field site that is very experimental, and you just saw a picture or a movie of this automated chamber system. And this had two great benefits. So we installed a highly experimental site in this basin structure. So from the top schematic, this is a basin with 3 separate extra basins inside. We established the 4 paludicultures. And we were able in this basin structure, first of all, to measure the greenhouse gas emissions in high frequency, and also to really finally resolve the water table conditions. So we could manipulate the water table to the centimeter, which was important as one of the objectives of our study was to find the optimal water table for the maximum greenhouse gas mitigation potential. So for this, you really need a lot of data, and manually collecting this would have taken decades, I believe. So this site is very special in this project and actually quite unique. And these are also already some of the results. So a lot of graphs, but they also all show the same thing. I just wanted to show that the water management was successful in most of the sites. So on the left-hand side here, we have the field sites that I showed you. And you see the time series of the water tables over the measurement year. So for example, here we had in the end mean water tables of -4 centimeters and -9 centimeters in the different treatments. Here we also were between 0 and -5, so a little bit higher than we anticipated. We were aiming for this optimum of -10. And in Riedhausen, and this is the site where I showed you that the peat layer in the soil was really shallow, this was a huge challenge for rewetting, as you can imagine. Because of this, the highly degraded soil structure. So here we didn't have an underlying intact layer of peat, but we just basically hit the mineral layer. And also the surrounding ditches were really deeply drained. So this site was really a challenge, but in the end, we still managed to get annual water tables of -13 and -30 centimeters here. So not that successful, but still increase the water tables. In the automated field site, of course, because we were able to really manipulate it to the centimeter, we achieved exactly what we wanted. We wanted 3 different water table classes to really be able to look at what the greenhouse gases do at the different water tables. And in the second year, we adjusted them again. So in the end, we got 6 different water table classes in this automated basin. And this is just a part of the biomass yield results because we had so many different treatments. But I wanted to show you here that, of course, the biomass development depends on the plant species that we're looking at. And these are the 4 plant species of the automated basin. But just in general, we are around always the 10 tons of dry matter per hectare in a year. So you see here, all plants can reach this under optimal conditions because water management here is essential. So the water table increases in every of these plant package bars. As I said, we established the different water table classes to actually study this, the effect of the water table. And these are wetland plants. So obviously they need wet conditions to grow optimally. And some are more susceptible to water level changes than others. For example, Carex has under semi-rewetted conditions and wet conditions, you achieve similar results in biomass quantities, while, for example, Phragmites, so the common reed and the cattail, they really differ under different water table conditions. And of course, what also matters is the stand age. So whether it's a 4-year-old stand or a 5-year-old stand, some plants reach mature stands earlier, for example, Carex, while others take a little bit longer. And this slide basically holds all the results from this large study. So I'll go through it a little bit more slowly. And we'll start with the figure. So every point in this figure here is an annual greenhouse gas balance. Excuse me. Of one of our treatments. And the colors give the different plant species, while the size of the dots gives the management intensity. So remember, only for Phalaris, we had the different management intensities. And the most important result really are the greenhouse gas balances. So as I said, the main result which we were aiming for is to get the greenhouse gas balances and also the range which was possible in these paludiculture systems. And what was really unexpected is actually the strong sink potential of almost up to 50 tons per hectare in a year in one of the common reed stands under relatively wet conditions. And what we also found is because we also looked at the carbon balance of the system, so not just the total greenhouse gas balances, which also includes nitrous oxide emissions, but the carbon balance. And this is essential for the definition of paludiculture. So in our data set, we achieved a negative carbon balance when the water tables were at least 12 centimeters or higher, minus 12 centimeters or higher. Yeah. So this is really important for the paludiculture definition. And then we applied a generalized additive mixed effects model, which is what you see in this graphic as well. This is the curvy line here is the smoother that we use. And what is quite obvious is that it's a highly nonlinear water table relationship, which makes sense because we're integrating the different gases which react differently to water tables. Some decrease with increased water tables and others increase. But we also found a significant plant effect and a significant management effect in the greenhouse gases. And the model showed that the maximum greenhouse mitigation potential in this data set was reached when the water table, the annual mean water table, was at minus 7 centimeters. So now I hope you remember the table that I showed you in the introduction. So these are the emission factors that are formulated for the main land use categories in Germany. And I just included cropland, grassland, and rewetted organic soils, which basically is a proxy for restoration. And in the end here in the final column, you see again the overall greenhouse gas balances. And what we could now do is we included the paludiculture as a new land use category. Yeah, so we have the paludicultures and we differentiated the data set into rewetted, which means any water levels above minus 10 centimeters, really wet systems, and moderately rewetted, because we found that even moderately rewetted, so down to 30 centimeters, delivered quite the climate benefit. So then we go again to this last column, and there you can see in comparison now we could achieve a maximum mitigation potential of over 50 tons of CO2 equivalents per hectares a year if we were to convert a cropland with an emission factor of around 40 tons to a rewetted paludiculture with our emission factor of about minus 12. Yeah, so this is the large mitigation potential really unheard of at the time, and it still yields the largest reduction in greenhouse gases of any nature-based solution. And so for the publication that comes with this study, I combined the results in a graphic showing again the large potential of this transformation in land use. And really, I'm just using this slide as an advertisement, so hopefully you will check out this publication. And now, though, I would like to put these results into context. So we're coming to a different project, the more ADAPT project. And here we established the 3 mitigation measures that I already introduced in the beginning. So what we did is we had as a reference, you see in this picture, typical intensively managed grassland. So the typical land use that is still happening here around us in most of the organic soils. So this means it was drained with an average annual water level of about minus 40. And we had cattle slurry application and 2 harvests per year. The first mitigation measure that we then tested was the rewetting of the grassland. So the same treatment, same plant community with 2 harvests and the cattle slurry application, but we increased the water table. The second mitigation measure was then the extensification of management. So we switched basically the vegetation to the lesser pond sedge, Carex acutiformis, left the water tables untouched, but did not fertilize and only harvested once. And then we had the third mitigation measure, which was, in this case, a paludiculture of Carex acutiformis. So again, no fertilization, only 1 harvest, but the water tables were increased. And the results are really interesting, to me anyway. So we're again looking at the total balances. So the y-axis gives the total emissions, and the bars give you, the colors give you different components of the balance. So again, the different gases, the carbon export, import. And the black dot gives you the total annual emissions. And for the intensive grassland, these are quite high in comparison to the national data set, but it's quite typical for this region. So we almost have 50 tons now. So if I now look outside at the grassland in front of my window, these grasslands emit 50 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per hectares a year. So this is huge. And in Ireland, it's much less. But in Germany, these are very intensively used and they are high in nutrients, so we have high emissions. So then if we look at the first mitigation option, which is the rewetting of this intensive grassland, you see that we can reduce these emissions by a lot. Yeah, so we're already at around 20 tons. If we then look at grassland extensification with the Cardex, we are in a similar range, so just below 20 tons. But again, the paludiculture creates a sink. Yeah, so we don't just have a reduction in emissions, but we can create a sink. And this value, around minus 11 tons, very close to the big data set that we produced afterwards of the minus 12 tons. So that's the one thing. And because of this unprecedented greenhouse gas mitigation potential of this nature-based solution, these results directly fed into policy programs here. So on a regional level, in southern Germany, the Peat Farmers Program was initiated in 2024. And this is the first program which really subsidizes establishment of paludiculture, aiming at a water table of minus 10 centimeters. And this measure would receive currently 2,200 euros per hectare a year. And this is guaranteed over a 12-year period. So this program also has other eligible measures, including the conversion of cropland to grassland on organic soils or the rewetting of grasslands, in this case aiming at minus 20 centimeters. And the results are also going into a program on national level, which I'm very happy about. So Germany is currently developing the funding guideline PALU, which is supposed to be starting in 2028. And this will subsidize different forms of paludiculture, also for a 12-year period. And at this point, I would like to point out, though, because all these programs are formulating, that as already mentioned in the nature restoration law, the most significant climate benefits are created by restoring and rewetting croplands, followed by the restoration of intensive grasslands. And this is really relevant in the discussion because we don't want to create conflicts with nature conservation. Because what tends to happen is that restoration and also paludiculture only be performed on extensive grassland or land that is already high in biodiversity value. And these really shouldn't be prioritized for paludiculture for the reason of nature conservation, but also for the reason that the greenhouse gas mitigation effect, of course, is lower if you already have a system that is lower in emissions. So we got a lot of answers, but of course, all answers always lead to more questions. So the open questions and the new projects that evolved after this are one of the major questions that, of course, also was what the farmers' most relevant reaction was. So what about the long-term stability of paludiculture biomass production and vitality? Of course, this is important if you're looking at, or if you're focusing on biomass production from a farmer's perspective. So we initiated the NAPALU project to assess the effects of nutrient availability and on the option of fertilizing paludicultures. And to look at the effects on biomass quality, greenhouse gas exchange, and nutrient dynamics. Another really relevant issue is the permanence and the durability of the mitigation potential that we now observed, and as well the resilience to future climate extremes, because this is not a static system, of course. So future climate change will bring with it several challenges, and of course these systems would be challenged as well. So to look at the fate of this newly sequestered atmospheric carbon and in the various pools of paludiculture, and so we wanted to look at the carbon sequestration itself, at the stability, but also at the resilience. So we initiated two other projects, the PaluTEP project, which started just in December. to analyze the long-term development of greenhouse gas mitigations. So look at the same system again after 10 years of establishment. This is what's happening now, but also at the biodiversity of paludiculture. And the second large project, the Cassipal project, is looking exactly at the carbon pools of paludiculture. And this is an isotope study that is currently starting in our automated field basin here with this automated chamber. So there we are able to perform an isotope labeling study under field conditions. Big challenge, but it started well. And generally, what we would suggest is the development of, for example, a transitional emission factor, which could improve the representation of climate effects during potential transitional phases of climate reporting, for climate reporting and also for funding scheme development. And the Napalu project we recently finished. Last week we handed in the final report. I just quickly want to go over this. I'm not sure how I am on time, but I only have 5 more slides. So this project was set up to test fertilization, and the idea of paludiculture is a really rather extensive way of management. Yeah, so the original idea is that you only have a winter harvest, yeah, to protect also the biodiversity, or even to harvest only every other year. But as I said, from the farmer's perspective, the stability of the yields are important. So this question comes and we're confronted with it. So we tested the effects of fertilization, balanced fertilization, on the biomass yield stability and of course on the greenhouse gas exchange. So again, we're back in the field at the auto chamber measurement basin, and we tested the paludiculture's lesser pondsedge, so carex, reed canary grass, and cattail. We applied different fertilizers. For phalaris, we applied organic fertilizers in a solid or liquid form of biogas digestate. And in the other 2 paludicultures, we used the mineral NPK complete fertilizer, which was urea protected. The groundwater scenarios were 2, because one was what we found out, this optimum water level for paludiculture with an annual mean of -7 centimeters. And the second scenario was the temporal lowering of the water tables to comply with current German fertilizer ordinances. So at the moment, it's not allowed to fertilize into saturated soils, which makes perfect sense. But the reasoning behind this comes from mineral soils and wasn't really tested for organic soils yet. So we were allowed for the scientific experiment to also test under high water tables.
Carla, I'm going to say, if we can keep it to about 2 minutes, there are a good few questions,
Okay.
and we'd like to try and address that. Thanks very much.
Perfect. Okay, 2 minutes. So quickly, the effects. I'm not going to read all of this, but I want to show you that. So the red is the reference, unfertilized, and the green ones are the fertilized treatments under different water table conditions. And we see carex could maintain an uptake potential. The others all resulted in greenhouse gas sources. And what's really important here that carex did not need fertilization to produce biomass, while in the other cases, tufa, for example, really needs a lot of nutrients. So if you want to plant tufa, please use a nutrient-rich site. And for phalaris, really, a less intensive management would lead to a mitigation potential, while more intensity is not a good idea for phalaris. And I just really quickly go what would happen under climate change, because temperatures are rising. We studied this as well, going back to the More Adapt project, where we have our reference and the 3 mitigation measures. We increase the temperature by 1 degree using open top chambers. And the results, you already saw half of them before, with our reference 50 tons. Under just 1 degree warming, yeah, the status quo, so business as usual continues, would increase from 50 to almost 70 tons. The mitigation measures are relatively stable, and so was the paludiculture. So even with an increase of 1 degree temperature, the mitigation potential and the sink potential could still be maintained. This we also published, so please check it out. And due to time constraints, I will maybe not go through my conclusion slide, and just say that just properly managed, fen paludiculture has the potential to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the agricultural LULUCF sector and even recreate the carbon sink function. And I will end here. Thank you very much.
And thanks very much for what would I say, abbreviating the end of your presentation, Carla. I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and there are a good number of questions after coming in. I'm going to go straight to either Owen or Pat to select a question or two. I can see there are common themes running through the questions. So if you just want to maybe select one and put it to Carla, and then we can maybe briefly discuss it then. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Carla. That was superb. There's a lot of very interesting work going on there, obviously, and a huge amount of data collected. I suppose just briefly to put in context, like the area you mentioned at the start, 1.93 million hectares is larger than what we have here. We have about 1.5 to 1.6 million hectares, but given the scales of the national area, you're at about 5% of the German national area. We're at about 20% of the Irish national area. So it's interesting, some of the contrasts, and from what we can see, they're probably much more productive on average and much more deeply drained, and hence the higher emissions, as you mentioned. One of the major comments that's coming in, and something that came to me when I was watching as well, is the use of those plants, or the harvesting or potential harvesting of that paludiculture plants. We would recognize those as you said, as wetland plants, or maybe being used in constructed wetlands or something like that. But I suppose, is there a mechanism to harvest them, and is there a market if they were to be harvested, or what is the end use, if there is an end use of those plants?
Yes, that's a typical question I get. While this is not the focus of my studies, I am aware of these issues or these ideas. And the thing is, with the harvest, it's actually quite practical, because what I said in the beginning is that this paludiculture seems to be a novel land use option. However, it's actually quite historic as well. So maybe some of you are aware of the roofing in many houses surrounding the North Sea. So the roof thatching of houses is very common to be used by common reed. Yeah. So there are machinery to harvest this, and this machinery this is further developed now because different plants are coming into the picture. But these machines already exist. The problem for farmers at the moment is only that they might not be regionally available. Yeah. And in Germany, for example, we have also a funding scheme that would subsidize buying these machines. So they do exist in the north of Germany, and there are many companies, I think, also in Poland that would sell these special machines to harvest on wet lands. So they're still very big machines. They just have a different, what is that called? Like not tires, but these
tracks,
rotary tracks. Yeah. So the pressure on the land is much lower, but you can still harvest them very well. And
would it be realistic then to say that without the widespread availability of such machinery, is there? You mentioned a scheme there that was €2,200 per hectare per year. Is that really the selling point here as things stand, as in that the crop itself isn't likely to yield, isn't likely to allow this to work from a farmer point of view?
Yeah, so the €2,200, they were the result of an economic analysis in this More Use project. Now we have new numbers from the newer project Napalu that I also showed you, because the economics are always looked at in more detail now, which is good. More data is becoming available, and more calculations can be done. And this is already increasing. So the current information is that you would need at least over €3,000 per hectare in a year, because there is no market yet. And this is the biggest problem, I think, for farmers, and that we're asking you to really transform your land use for a more sustainable and climate-friendly scenery, basically. But what do you do with the biomass? So I did include a slide in the end. I will just quickly go there. Yeah, basically I can show you a few utilization. Do you see this now? I hope.
Yeah, we're seeing the Morus results slide, Carla.
Yeah, the biomass utilization options. So there are different ways of the biomass that can be used, and we tested this as well in the More Use project. So there's on the one side the energetic use. So you can use it thermally for combustion. And there's I'm giving you the reference to one of the publications of the study. So this works quite well, but depends on your combustion facility, I guess I would say. So it needs a special plants facilities for the total combustion without residues. So this is still an issue, but it can be technically resolved. Then there are tests on biogas substrate. So this can also be used as biogas substrate or additional material, just substituting some of the common biogas components at the moment.
There are some alternatives. So, okay.
Yeah,
I'm conscious again of the questions. You have some on the rewetting side, Owen, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions coming in on the rewetting, and I suppose as well on the emissions, in particular methane emissions. So I kind of group those for all the people who have asked questions there in the chat. I'll try to group them into two kind of questions. One is, are these commercial farms at the moment that you're rewetting, and how does that process happen? And how long does it take for that water table, recovery rewetting? And a big one here always is how much control can you have over the rewetting on your site and, not affect maybe your neighboring farmer. So that's on the water table side questions definitely there. And the second part to that then, Carla, is methane emissions. Do you have a timeline on as you're increasing the water table, what's the time frame that those methane emissions, as things get wetter, may dissipate over time?
Yeah. Well, actually, both answers are, in theory, very simple. Yeah. So the water or the rewetting of the agriculturally scale field sites really depends on the soil. Yeah, as I showed you the soil pictures. So the more degraded your soil is, the worse it is to be rewetted, really. Yeah, and of course we have this top layer that was always very degraded because of the previous use over hundreds or hundreds of years. This was used for cropland at the worst case or intensive grassland. So you do have usually a layer of 30 centimeters that are highly degraded. But if you underneath have an intact peat body, even if it's just, again, 30 centimeters, the rewetting will be much easier. And this, of course, depends on your surrounding area. So when we started the project, we had to work with these little blankets, really tiny field sizes. And that was a challenge. We really thought, hopefully, we can increase the water table at all in the field size. But because of the intact peat layer, and because of the drainage ditches, and I'm sure you have the same system, so we have a lot of drainage ditches or subsurface drainage even that is implemented into these fields. And you can use these and turn it around for rewetting. So really this is actually, it's good if you have the drainage ditches because you can use it for water infiltration. And we did dig a few channels, but only simple with a little the small machinery where you just dig a few drainage ditches in the field side for infiltration. This works really well. And of course, this depends on your surrounding water. Yeah. And the neighbors were not affected. So this is really good. And here some slopes actually help. Yeah, if you have sloping around your field site.
Really good, Carla. So in other words, you have good control over the rewetting effect to where you want it to occur for your polluticulture. Then the second part was the methane emission. Yes. It's something that does come up quite a bit here in the questions.
Yeah, so I'll show you a few of the results in this main project. Just an example here, 2 treatments. So we see a very typical clear seasonal dynamic of methane fluxes. Yeah, over the year, you always have high fluxes when periods of high temperatures are there. So in the summertime, you get high fluxes, and especially the wetland plants that have this Arrenchyma self-structure. So it's like an internal sponge-like structure that acts as a vent, because these plants are adapted to wet conditions. So they need a way of transporting oxygen to the roots and, for example, methane out of the root system into the air. So we do have higher emissions here, but if we compare our results on the right-hand side of the methane emissions, so these are the emissions, this is the water table, we do see this clear dependence of water table, so it increases a lot. But if we compare it to the national data set, we see that in comparison, with a maximum of 700 kilos per hectares a year under flooding situations, we're not even reaching the maximum in unutilized soils. Because these systems just, it depends again on plant species. So Phalaris and Tufa, for example, have higher fluxes. And there was also a relationship between the biomass yield and the fluxes. But if we then stay at the suggested -7 centimeters, or keep the water tables between just slightly below the surface to maybe -15, if we can achieve that, the emissions are really quite low. So the challenge is all in the balance of reducing CO2 and also keeping methane low.
Okay, and there's just some other ones there, Carla, before we finish up. I suppose what struck me there is the scale that you're working at. I said you have very precise data, but you mentioned at one point active pumping into the areas that are being re-wetted and controlling the water table to the centimeter. And then we've touched off already the roadblocks or the barriers that are there, I suppose, from the farmer point of view in terms of uptake in this area. Like, in terms of the scale of uptake or the potential uptake that you see here, is there numbers on that with the scheme that you mentioned in terms of how much buy-in there is, I suppose, and maybe some of the roadblocks that are there to try and move people in this direction, or a proportion of the landowners, I mean, in this direction.
So you mean how many people are actually doing this now?
Yeah, and maybe what are the roadblocks, or what are the concerns? Or, well, there's clear concerns we've touched off, but maybe how that's playing out in practice, I suppose.
Yeah. So from our perspective, the technical implementation of paludiculture is not the main challenge. This is doable. The water is there, the technology is there, and we can plant or establish the plants. The major challenge really are the water regulations, so the laws behind it. And in Germany, this is the main focus at the moment on a political level, where they're trying to change regulations, because this is really the main barrier. Are you allowed to re-wet your site? What about the neighbors? Who is reimbursing them in case they get wet fields? This really is the main challenge for taking this up. And the second point that you already asked is the amount of money that are being put in these subsidies. So this is not enough, definitely not. So we assume now, from the knowledge or the results of our studies, that you should at least double this. So because if you give people, or if you give farmers the 3,000 euros per hectare in year, they end up still at zero. So this makes no sense. This has to be increased, the amount of subsidy that you receive. And this would be feasible if we would end subsidizing the unsustainable use of fields. There is enough money there. It just needs to be shifted. And I know just is not the right word. It's a very complex process. But I believe these are the two main issues. The market would develop. We already have pioneers in Germany, huge companies that use this biomass for their packaging, for example, huge clothing companies that use it for sending their goods. So it's there. It's really the regulations.
I'm conscious of the time, but I think there are an awful lot of questions. I think it might be no harm to ask another few questions. Can I just ask, with relation to Pat's last thing there, is, the farmers that it is on their farm, do they have to pay somebody to come in and do this work, or what are the practical actions that the farmer needs to do on the ground to meet the criteria?
So for the practical actions, just the establishment of the paludiculture, I really suggest looking up this guide that we fortunately published in English. I mean, the project report unfortunately is in German, but we have this guideline that's in English. And what needs to happen, it's very common actions that you would do as a farmer anyways. It's like if you would renew your grassland, for example, or in a cropping system, if you would introduce a new crop. So this works the same way. The preparation of the field, this is nothing new that you would have to do. Yeah, the seeds it depends on the species. Some are easily available, others are still being tested. And the rewetting really is the major part, I would say. And this really depends on your neighbors. So this is something that's also been done at the moment. Not sure of the English word, but the idea is to combine fields, yeah, or to switch out farmers' fields if they don't want to participate, to trade the fields with another site, for example, and maybe a mineral site. This is what's happening a lot, or what's being offered. So really transitioning is a technical challenge, but one where we do have the solutions already, I would say.
And Carla, just one from me here. There's a good question here. What type of surveys and analysis are required before starting rewetting? So you're a farmer and you want to progress an area of the land. What are the kinds of things in place in Germany? Is there something like a peatland code or something like that to follow?
I'm not really sure if I know the answer to this. I'm sorry, because the policy and the regulations behind it are not really my field of knowledge, unfortunately.
I was actually going to come at that in a slightly different way, Carla. Like if you were someone who wanted to take up the €2,200 scheme in a particular part of the region, is there a technical person that can come and work with you to get that off the ground and make sure you're compliant? I think there was a particular figure there in terms of maintaining the water table at 10 centimeter depth. To achieve that from a standing start, is there help there, or how does that work?
There is help, and I think it's quite similar to maybe what you have in Ireland now. So these consultants are available to farmers that specify in peatland and sustainable peatland use, so also peatland rewetting. And actually our institute is training them in part for this region at least. And there is a German program that's being started now to train these consultants, these agricultural consultants, exactly for this purpose, because there are so many question marks and still not all of them are resolved. But there is a personnel behind this. And also, as I said, the subsidies are also there additionally for the rewetting measures. So this is nothing that the farmer has to carry. Yeah, the rewetting measures are paid for from a different budget. Not sure how hard it is to apply for that, but Germany is working towards getting everything in place. But of course, there are so many barriers still that need to be reduced. Mm-hmm. But I think particularly subsidizing the unsustainable use, that would be a game changer, I think, because money would be free then, to allocate to these measures.
Okay, thanks very much, Carla. I know we're a little over time, but I think it was useful to go into those last few questions. And I'd like to thank Owen and Pat particularly, because I think you've done a fantastic job in summarising a lot of those questions. And it is certainly an area we are going to have to come back to, because judging by the numbers on the webinar and the number of questions that came in, once the discussion got going, the questions just kept flying in and we didn't get near them all. So well done to the two of you on summarising a lot of those questions. And really, I think a lot of them were addressed in the time that we had. I'd like to start by thanking Carla. It's great to have expertise from across the EU and to see these particularly novel land use. I think certainly what I'm hearing through my role and judging by the webinars is these novel land use. I think they're so useful and there's huge interest in it. And my thanks to Pat and to Owen for their assistance and their insights this morning. It's been really insightful and really interesting. And I certainly think it's something we should look at again. Next week we have no webinar. It's Good Friday, but we'll be back the following week talking about our favourite subject, the weather. So we really hope you can join us then. Thanks again to our panel. Thanks to everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you. Have a very happy Easter.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.